Hello and welcome to Spider Ranting. Now this is the Broken Ranks ranting series focused on my Fire Mage Spider Grind PTR. Now, as you're probably aware, Whitemoon has just released the Public Test Realm, or PTR, a server where you can test upcoming changes to the game with your characters before they go live. Now, I'd like to first applaud this development. Allowing all the players to easily test new content is a great show of community goodwill, and I'm glad it's been added to the game. Unfortunately, that might be the last praise you hear for Whitemoon in this video. Now, at the end of this video, I will go into some suggestions and discussions of game balance and how to do game balance well. But to start with, I just want to talk about the update that's recently been released for testing. So, patch 9.54, currently available in the PTR, brings many changes, and perhaps most controversial is a new stat, Intelligence. And currently buffs require Knowledge to be cast with less AP, but this patch changes them to require Intelligence instead. So Intelligence does nothing else for the character, it only impacts buff AP requirements, and it cannot be gained from gear. It's only available from the base stats that you get every time you level up. So, as you can see by these translated suggestions, the Polish community is not thrilled with the Intelligence system, and honestly I don't think anybody is. At first glance, it seems reasonable. Mage classes get knowledge for free from gear, whereas physical classes have to put points into it. So let's add this new stat to even the playing field. However, this overlooks a couple of key details. Firstly, physical classes have their damage scale more with weapon damage and less with stats, so when they had to put some points into knowledge, it wasn't that costly. And secondly, once a player has 2 Sidraga rings, they don't need to put any points into knowledge. They have enough to cast their buffs if they're a archer, barbarian, or Sheed. Of course, the exception is Knight, and Knights might just be the class experiencing the strangest changes in this update, but more on that later. First, I just want to talk about Knights and their buff requirements. So yeah, Knights do need a lot of knowledge to cast their buffs with 1 AP. However, Battle Fervor allowed Knights to convert those stats into Strength and Dexterity, and this update removes Battle Fervor, so all of those stats that they have to put into Intelligence now are completely locked away. It's just wasted stats in terms of their actual gameplay. Additionally, Knowledge was somewhat useful, so for a class where Shield Block and Farids counteract melee and ranged attacks, mental attacks and debuffs were their biggest weakness. High Knowledge made it so that it wasn't entirely pointless putting some AP into mental defense, but without Knowledge, Knights will be more vulnerable. However, the biggest loser of this update is Druids. The Intelligence requirements for their buffs is wildly high. Druids are already pretty stat-starved, needing higher HP than other classes due to very weak defensive skills, and also needing more power and knowledge due to dealing very low damage and having low accuracy. And now they need 224 Intelligence to cast Master 1 Dispel with 1 AP. That is an absurd loss of stats. Okay, so those are some of the issues with Intelligence, but unfortunately, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Patch 9.54 ushers in a suite of additional balance changes, heavily altering most classes, and also bringing some miscellaneous changes. So let's take a look at just what the patch notes have to say. Okay, so here we are on the patch notes, and they talk about adding Intelligence, shortening the duration of buffs for most classes. So this is an interesting one. So buffs that previously would last 5 or even 6 rounds are now generally going to last about 3 rounds for the levels you're going to be casting them at. So this means you're going to be casting buffs more often, and that comes with some associated downsides. One of the downsides obviously is you're casting buffs more often. That means your casting less attacks, right? Like every slot that you use for a buff is a slot that you're not using for an attack. So classes like knights, for example, who are doing, a lot of buffs for the DPS, they're going to be recasting those buffs more often and being able to attack less, which is kind of counter to what the devs said the update was designed for. They said they wanted to update Knight to be able to, have more of a role in combat, be able to do more actions. I don't think Knights really wanted to be casting buffs more often when they heard that. So a bit of a strange choice there. Also going to cost a lot more mana, right? Especially for Knights, which are casting a lot of buffs, using a lot more mana because your buffs are shorter. That's going to be another drain on your stats. You're going to need to put more stats into mana. So, questionable choice there. Maybe it could work. Not entirely sure. Okay. Decreased the per level scaling of elemental drifts, Val, Cal, and Un from 0.5 to 0.35. I think this is actually a really good change. So, the fact that classes that use weapons, melee weapons, had such high damage boosts from the elemental drifts in their legends was pretty unbalanced. And we saw this with Sheeds doing absolutely absurd damage numbers. Even Knights were doing pretty good damage. And of course, Barbarians do ridiculous damage. And that is one of the interesting things about this update, is it does narrow the gap between Fire Mage and Barbarian, which is a good thing. Barbarian currently does a lot more damage than Fire Mage. Now, prior to drifts and incrustation and everything, Fire Mage and Barbarian were kind of balanced in the sense that, Fire Mage could put out a lot of damage once it landed vulnerability and once it landed burning, and Barbarian did a lot of damage out of the gate, but it had less accuracy, had less double attack. There were pros and cons to both classes. With Drifts and Incrustation, both of them just have the same hit chance, and Barbarian just straight up does 50 to 100% more damage. It's actually absurd, the difference between the damage they output, given that they're both supposed to be DPS classes. Fire Mage damage is actually closer to Voodoo damage or Sheed damage than it is to Barbarian damage, which is not how it should be in a game where you're playing a DPS. So Fire Mage has been long neglected, and this helps balance things out a little bit. It's about a 5 or 6% reduction in total damage to Barbarian damage, so not a huge change, but it is something. Okay, now we get into the changes to Knight, which, as I mentioned before, are some of the craziest changes Whitemoon is proposing. So take a look at what's going on here. Now, we're going to start with something pretty reasonable. Replacing Battle Fervor with Shield Bash. Now, I do think losing Battle Fervor is going to hurt Knights with the new intelligence system, because they no longer have a way to make those stats that they've put into hitting buffs useful anymore, right? Those stats are purely used for buffs now, and they cannot get them back in any way. Previously, Battle Fervor allowed you to get your knowledge back if you were doing solo and just wanted to do some damage. So, a bit of a loss losing Battle Fervor in my opinion, but Shield Bash, it doesn't seem bad. It's kind of an interesting skill. So the idea is you reduce the damage that your enemy does with mental attacks after you Shield Bash them. So you will, for a certain number of their subsequent attacks after being debuffed, that number going up as you increase the level of your Shield Bash, they're going to do less damage. So it's essentially like a melee poison you're dealing, but instead of like poison lasting 6 rounds, it's the Shield Bash that lasts for 2 or 3 attacks. So it's an interesting mechanic. I don't mind this. I don't know if it's balanced or not, but it's a good way of approaching the issue of Knight being vulnerable to mental. Gives them a bit of a way around the problem is most mental issues that knights face in endgame are the debuffs, really. So being frozen, being foded, face of death, or being hit with those percentage HP attacks like Selena does, like Admiral does, like Eldinger does. Those are the bigger threats to Knight than like actual damage attacks like Pure Stole and such. So it's kind of limited in what it offsets here, but it is an interesting skill. I don't hate that. Okay, now here's where things get really crazy. So currently, Sacrifice increases physical damage by about 50% if you're running a master level Sacrifice, and magical damage by 25%. So it's like adding 50% Asta, 25% a Bath. They're changing that. They're changing that big time. They're changing it to multiply your stats. So instead of giving you 25% a Bath, it's going to give you 40% more power based on your stats. So if you have 1,000 power, it's giving you 400 more power. And if you don't think that's crazy, let's think about that a little bit. And let's particularly think about how this is going to be balanced with physical classes and mage classes. It's the same for both. Now, it's pretty weird that currently it gives 50% Asta, but only 25% Bath, right? Like, it gives half as much value to magical classes versus physical classes for absolutely no reason. This, however, they've gone too far. This does not give the same value to physical and magical classes. This gives the same percentage increase to stats. But the problem is, a barbarian gets 0.7 times their strength in their damage calculation, and a fire mage gets 1.4 times their power in their damage calculation. Because barbarians, of course, have weapon damage in their weapon formula, so it's weapon damage and then less of their stats. Fire mage is all stats. And so Fire Mage scales twice as much with their stats as Barbarian does, which means that Fire Mage is getting twice as much damage from Sacrifice as Barbarian is, which is a very interesting choice. It's completely unbalanced. These numbers are ridiculous. The power this gives players is absurd. The fact that it's completely unbalanced for mage versus physical classes is the cherry on top. This entire approach is, in my opinion, a terrible idea. Same thing with Power of Unity. It's doing a percentage-based increase. Less bad because dexterity and knowledge have less of an impact on players' damage, but it's really sus, man. And yeah, I don't think they should touch Power of Unity. Like, why? Just why? Why are they changing these? Like, just make it so that Sacrifice gives the same amount of a buff as it does Asta, and you're fine. But those are the only changes you need to make to the buffs. This is insane. It's completely unbalanced. Okay. Calc Strike. So instead of reducing the enemy's defense, instead of reducing the enemy's hit chance like Calc Strike used to do, it now reduces their defense. So the devs have just admitted that defense, like player defense, is meaningless, right? Like, players are not defending against attacks anymore, especially if knights don't have any knowledge. Then debuffing a enemy's mental hit chance isn't going to help them at all. So I guess, yeah, the play is just do more damage, and reducing an enemy's defense helps you do more damage because you're going to hit more attacks. So knights are basically kind of sheeds now. This is a really weird skill. So it's kind of like Dementia, where it's reducing the enemy's defense and then also increasing the player's damage. But honestly, it might be even stronger. This is really powerful. I think it can be made to work, but you're really gonna need to balance night damage around this, because this is a powerful skill. Okay, Purity Aura. This is a weird change as well. Like, okay, so it increases your resists by just point values up to master levels, and then at master levels it also adds a percentage increase. So I guess it first adds the points to your resists, calculates a new percentage that you get, and then adds an additional percentage on top. So I'm not actually sure if that's an additive percentage. So if you have 80%, if an extra 2% gets you to 82%, or if it's multiplicative, so that going from 80% times 1.02 gets you to 81.6%. Not sure. Doesn't matter that much, I don't think, which one they choose there, but kind of a weird change. I don't know why they're splitting resists up into points and percentages and making them stack like that. Seems a little complicated for no particular reason, but this is the least egregious of the changes to night buffs. So yeah, Mighty Blow, increasing damage. I don't know. It's maybe fine. I don't know what they're balancing for. It's whatever. Removing the debuff that decreases the knight's chance to hit if the knight is wounded. Okay, it doesn't change much. That debuff really doesn't matter once you start building Ulk. The sequence in which skills are unlocked, yeah, fair enough. Being able to add offensive orbs into shields, really good change, actually. I don't know why that wasn't in there before. Yeah. Okay, now Sheed. Sheed gets fucked by this update. It's bad. Okay, so Sheed already lost some elemental damage because they're nerfing Val Kal-Un, right? Now it's gonna get nerfed even harder. So front kick gets gutted. So instead of getting negative 80% on the enemy's defense, you're getting like negative 30%. Like, it's a joke. It's like the same scaling as a Kelk Strike, basically. Slightly different scaling. Kelk Strike jumps around a bit more, but basically the same ballpark. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And it gives the Sheath less damage than Mighty Blow, or than Kelk Strike gives Knight. It also increases range damage. So, really interesting change. I don't know. I think Sheed is incredibly OP right now. Like, the fact that Sheed can just hit front kick and then it just, hits every single other attack after that, it's pretty OP. And Sheed damage is insane right now. Like, they're dealing more damage than fire mages in some cases. It's weird. But this feels strange. Like, I don't know. Like, front kick was the defining feature of the Sheed. I feel like you could just balance around that, right? Like, reduce Sheed's damage, but they have really amazing hit chance if front kick hits. That's fine. Like, what's the issue with that? I don't know. Now it's just kind of like a Kelk Strike variant for some reason. I don't get it. Okay, Chi Punch, reducing damage, completely justified. If we're talking about like relational class balance, right? Like, the fact that Sheed was doing like more damage than Fire Mage, kind of untenable. So this is a reasonable change, considering it in that context. Fireball, increased damage. Yes. Reasonable change. Fireball did shit damage. Increasing it. This ends up being about a 10% increase to Fire Mage damage. So, Fire Mage gets a 10% boost. Barbarian loses like 6%. All told, Barbarian's still probably doing 30 to 50% more damage, maybe more in some cases, assuming, a Fire Mage and Barbarian with equal stats and gear. However, it's kind of reasonable for a Barb to do more damage, right? Because they do have to hit Rip first, and they do attack second, and they are vulnerable to being rooted and potentially other mental debuffs. So I don't mind if Barb does more damage. Getting a bit closer like this is a good change. Fire Mage is in a bit of a weird spot now because 305% is very, very close to the 319% of Meteor. I guess the devs have just accepted that Meteor is useless. It costs like twice as much mana as Fireball and does no more damage. So who cares about Meteor? No one uses it anyway. But it's kind of due for a rework at some point in the future, I think. Dispersion Aura. So Dispersion Aura, instead of giving you a Lorn, which was a bit of a problem because if you had 40% a Lorn, Dispersion did literally nothing for you. If you had 35%, even if your Dispersion was 10%, you only got 5%. Now it works as an orb, so it adds to your orb percentage damage reduction instead of your Lorn damage reduction, which means it's uncapped. Which means it actually does reduce the damage you take, even if you're maxed to Lorn. So, kind of useful. The fact that it is primarily melee damage reduction, and then range and then mental kind of makes sense, I guess, especially the melee, because Fire Mage is vulnerable to melee. So, not sure if these numbers are sensible or not. They look reasonable, right? Like you're getting less than you would from an orb. However, it's just a buff that you cast, so kind of free. Probably skippable though. Like I think a lot of people will choose to just keep doing the extra Fireball instead of casting Dispersion, which is kind of a problem because Dispersion was really good for weaker teams, right? Like if you had, 25-30% a Lorn and then Dispersion got you to 35-40, that was a huge deal. This is going to be less impactful than that. So for weaker teams, they're actually going to struggle more with this change to Dispersion. And stronger teams probably don't even need to cast Dispersion. So now that I think about it, probably not a win. But, they're at least aware of the problem, so I'll give them that. Thick Skin, here they're doing that weird thing where they do point increases to resists as well as percentage increases to resists once you get into the master levels. Honestly, it's probably fine. Thick Skin's always made you super tanky. This looks like it still does. Druid. So, firstly, Druid gets fucked by intelligence. Hard. Very hard. And now the devs are just saying, alright, Druids, you are a bash bot. Build Ulk, build elemental damage, and bash. Do not build Oda, do not build Lorb, do not pass Go, do not collect $200. Look at this. They are buffing the shit out of bash damage and not buffing Swarm and Roots, really. Like, okay, tiny boost to accuracy on Swarm and Roots. It doesn't matter. You know what the issue with Swarm and Roots are? Twofold. One, they don't do fuck all damage. Two, they go against mental resist. Right? So a lot of mobs have really high mental resist. So you're already sitting at like a 65% hit chance, even if the mob is not defending mental at all. Voodoos, on the other hand, have Pure Stall, skip mental res, so they would get 100% hit chance. Druid gets 65. You know, if the mob is defending, maybe Voodoo hit chance is 80, Druid hit chance is like 50, right? Like, Druid hit chance is just fucked by mental res, and then they don't even do much damage when they hit. The Swarm debuff is meaningless because AP debuffs only matter if a fight lasts more than one round, which they never do. Roots are a good debuff for helping fire mages hit, but the hit chance is really bad, the damage isn't great, and it looks like druids aren't going to be building Lorb or Oda anymore. They're just going to be building Ulk, so good luck hitting your roots now, even though the hit chance has been buffed by 5% or whatever the fuck. Yeah, this is weird. This is really weird. Why are they not buffing mental? Right? Like, the advantage of Druid over other classes is you get to attack in mental, and they're not making that a viable choice. So, very questionable. Druid damage is going to be absolutely annihilated by the intelligence changes. They're not going to be able to hit shit. They're not going to do any damage. So basically, they're just going to not build intelligence, build full bash, and bash things solo or something. I don't know what the plan here is, but it's not good. Like, what? Anyway, so Druid is hopeless. Druids are quitting the game. Voodoo Pure Stall, decrease in damage, probably deserved. It had the same damage scaling as Fireball, but it did Pierce, so effectively did more. Less if the Fire Mage incanted, but Voodoo had Dementia, so it's kind of... It was too close to Fire Mage, so reasonable change in terms of that balance there. Okay, now the rest of this mostly doesn't matter. Let's scroll through here a bit. They're adding instances for Greater Hawk and Wendigo. Pretty cool. Kind of, especially on like new servers where Sheeds and Archers are trying to get their weapons. This is a nice update. Also, like Knights trying to get Avalanche. Some other miscellaneous little changes here. Change the Mantis instance. You can use Mantis or insect maps for hard mode or easy mode. Not bad. Here's where things get not good. So, remove the requirement of completing quests. Good. However, completing the quests let you get the free crampons every 3 days, as we currently get. Not bad. Or a free ring of transportation every week. Okay, cool. That's new. I'll always take a free ring every week. That's great. Removed weight from instance entry items that cannot be removed from the backpack. Okay, that's awesome. You know, it's always been, you know, the last Christmas event, I got like 250 time crystals and I couldn't fit them all in my backpack. I had to start melting time crystals because I literally could not store all the time crystals I was getting from the event. Awesome. Remove the weight. I love it. Wait a second. Max 30 crampons and rings of transportation? Time crystal and time sliver, work in progress? Hello? Okay. So we can't have more than 30 of these items in our inventory, which is bullshit. Because, okay, either that means they're going to be nerfing events to shit, right? So, you know, it's going to be like you do the Christmas event and you get 10 time crystals instead of 250? Or are you just not going to be able to redeem rewards? Are you, right? Like, are you just going to get fucked on your rewards and you're going to have to like go run a admiral and then run back, redeem a reward, go run another admiral, run back, redeem a reward? Will it go past that limit in events, but you just can't get any new ones? Yeah, that's not the worst, but it's still a bit of a pain in the ass if you don't want to be running all of that content all the time, right? Like, you might want to be running admirals for a month, and then doing something else for a month, right? Like, maybe you don't want to be running 5 Admirals every week and 5 Sidragas every week and 5 Mahets every week. Maybe you want to focus on some content and save the other content for later. Well, you can't do that anymore because there's a maximum of what you can hold. Obviously, right now there's a soft maximum based on your inventory limit, but that's like 1,000, right? So, or more like 500, or, you know, much higher than 30. Also kind of fucks ult, right? Like, if you have an ult that you're not playing, well, sucks to suck, you can't be accumulating resources on it in preparation for when you do play on the ult. You just have to do those runs as you can. Or for lower level players who want to start accumulating stuff in preparation for doing the content more often when they get stronger, can't do that. So, I don't know. Feels bad. It feels like a totally unnecessary limit, or at least raise it to something, like 500 or something. I don't know. 30 is insane. It's absolutely ridiculous. 30 is. Okay. Anyway, the rest of this is not a big deal, I should think. I'm very happy with this update. Very, very happy. Fixing that sword icon. I thought that was a deliberate change, given how long it was left in the game. Like, the fact that you only saw the green sword icon over the player's head and not the red sword icon over the enemy's head. So annoying. You never knew what people were fighting, and now you do. So, love to see that. But I don't know what the devs are thinking with this update. There's so many strange changes here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how balance should be done and why it's not working the way they're approaching it now. Because what they're doing right now is they're trying to apply band-aids to something that is, it's amputated, right? Like, you can't put a band-aid on a severed arm and expect it to fix things. You need to recognize what's going on and approach it informed by that. So let's take a look at how the game used to be and why it doesn't work anymore. Let's look at some older gameplay from when I was a lot weaker. So even for a DPS, fights involved some strategy back then. So round 1, you would do your buffs and cast Burning, because you didn't have any mental debuffs on, so you couldn't hit Fire Vulnerability yet. And then later on, you would cast Fire Vulnerability after there were more debuffs and you had a better hit chance. You might also refresh Burning if it was wearing off. But also, if you missed Vulnerability or if Burning was wearing off, you might try and reapply it, or you might just focus on fireballs depending on how much HP was left and what debuffs were on, if it was reasonable to just kill it with fireball or if you needed the debuffs. And gameplay today is different. When everything dies in 1 or 2 rounds, the only strategy is just do more damage. Every class is just doing as much damage as they can, especially DPS. And you might say this has an easy solution, just make content harder. If Sidraga had 5 times as much HP, even the strongest teams would probably have to engage with her mechanics and use more of their skills. And that's true. If she had that much HP, she would take longer for the strongest teams to kill, and they would have the champs summoned, they would have the bans, all of that. But what about weaker teams? So the first issue is how much damage players can do, but the reason this cannot be fixed is because of how large the gap is between weak players and strong players. And the reason for that gap is how gear works now. So consider how gear worked before. Before drifts, before incrustation, just the old Psycho Rare system that was inherited from Pride of Tarn. If 2 players have an item, they have the same stats. If I have Envils and some player who's been playing for 10 years has Envils, those Envils have the exact same stats. Barring upgrades, of course, but we all know what the upgrade system is like. So just getting those endgame items gets you endgame levels of strength. But that's not the case anymore. Now getting the item is just the beginning. you need to spend another 58,650 shards encrusting it to gold 3. And gold 3 in particular unlocks the majority of the item's power, not only being a huge stat boost, but also empowering your drifts and providing more drift capacity, meaning that a player with G3 gear is substantially stronger than even the stats suggest. So you cannot balance Sadraga to take 5 rounds for a full gold 3 party of players. It would make the dungeon a monumental challenge for full gold 2 players, and near impossible for full gold 1 players. Not to mention players on new servers trying to do Sadraga for the first time without legends or Sadraga gear. But if you balance the dungeon for players in even gold 1 or gold 2 gear, players in gold 3 gear will easily steamroll everything in the dungeon. And that's because of how impactful incrustation is. There's just this insane gulf between the weakest endgame players and the strongest endgame players, and you just cannot design content that provides a fair challenge for both of those groups. You cannot solve this by nerfing players, rebalancing skills, or buffing bosses. Those changes don't address the core issue. There are only 3 approaches that can effectively balance this situation. The first solution is to make shards dramatically easier to obtain. If it's as easy to gold 3 an item as it is to get a drift to level 21, for example, then you can simply balance everything for max gear players and expect that everyone will reach that level. Another option is to dramatically nerf or redistribute the benefits of incrustation. If, for example, incrustation gave fewer stats, and the drift empowerment and drift capacity were gained at silver tiers of incrustation rather than gold, then players could get the majority of the benefits more readily and not be completely outclassed by players with more incrustation. Finally, the third option is just accept that stronger players will farm easy content quickly. Yes, Sadraga is a joke to players now, that's fine. It's designed for players without legends and without Sadraga gear. Add new, harder challenges for the strongest players. All these balance changes that the devs are doing, they miss the point. They can't find a balance that works for everyone doing that, and they never will. That's why a lot of the changes are so absurd. The devs are grasping for new mechanics to shake things up, but it's impossible to do so as long as there's such a huge gap between early endgame players and maxed endgame players. They need to stop trying to apply balance band-aids to the problem and address the underlying cause instead. Alright, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do, if you agreed or disagreed, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you agree about what I was saying there, about how the current approach to changes is not working and they need to take a different approach to addressing that gulf between early endgame and late endgame players and the inability to balance content around them as the game is currently designed, please do share this video with the devs or condense it into a Polish summary for them, because I think those 3 options that I listed of making shards easier to obtain, nerfing or redistributing the benefits of incrustation, or just making harder content for stronger players, the devs need to do that. They can't keep just balancing the game around damage numbers. It doesn't fix the core issue, and I would really like to see the game improved and be enjoyable for all players, so I hope the devs recognize this and make some changes to their approach here. But thank you for your time watching, and I hope you enjoy playing around on the test server.